Welcome to my philosophy channel. Before we begin, I invite you to find a truly comfortable position. Adjust your posture, relax your shoulders, and if you wish, gently close your eyes. This episode is not a quick tutorial. It is a long and immersive journey. It is designed not just for watching, but for deep, meditative listening. Let the frantic noise of the outside world slowly fade away. Allow your breathing to deepen and let your mind settle into a state of pure, undisturbed reflection. Now, as you sink into this quiet space, I want you to ponder a profound question. Why do most people stay busy their entire lives, yet never build real wealth? Have you ever stopped to observe the frantic rhythm of the modern city? Millions of souls rushing through crowded subway stations, staring anxiously at glowing screens. They dedicate 8, 10, or 12 hours a day to exhausting labor. They sacrifice their youth, their vitality, and their most precious dreams for a monthly paycheck. Yet when the decades pass and the twilight of life approaches, their bank accounts remain terribly fragile. Why does such immense and painful effort produce such pitiful and inadequate rewards? Is the universe fundamentally unfair, or are we playing the wrong game entirely? We are deeply conditioned from childhood to believe that sweat automatically equates to success. We measure our personal virtue by the depth of our exhaustion. But we must ask ourselves a ruthless question. Is being busy the exact same thing as being productive? If you spend your entire life digging a massive hole in the wrong place, your hard work is merely a tragedy. Most ordinary individuals are tragically trapped in a perpetual hamster wheel. They are sprinting blindly and frantically without ever stopping to check their moral or financial compass. They fundamentally confuse aimless motion with tangible progress. They trade their most irreplaceable and finite asset, which is their mortal time, for a fiat currency that is constantly losing its true purchasing power. Is this constant rushing a rational strategy for survival, or a carefully constructed trap designed to keep the masses docile and distracted? Society frequently whispers the gospel of patience to us. We hear the phrase long-termism echoed endlessly by motivational speakers, financial gurus, and corporate executives. However, the ordinary human mind fundamentally misinterprets this profound and ancient philosophy. The vast majority of the masses falsely believe that long-termism simply means enduring painful boredom. They mistakenly think it is the passive act of waiting, gritting their teeth, and hoping that the passage of time will eventually reward their mindless and monotonous repetition. But we must realize that time alone does not magically reward blind and aimless endurance. Time only magnifies the underlying system you have built beneath the surface. If your intellectual and financial system is deeply flawed, the passage of time will only accelerate your eventual ruin. True long-termism is never about simply surviving the passing years in a state of stoic misery. It is about deliberately designing a masterpiece through the relentless application of unshakable principles. Why is it so agonizingly difficult for the average person to grasp this simple yet profound truth? The brutal answer lies deep within the biological wiring and architecture of human nature itself. We are primal creatures who are heavily governed by a neurochemical known as dopamine. In the ancestral wilderness, the pursuit of instant gratification was absolutely essential for biological survival. If our ancient ancestors found a calorie-dense fruit hanging from a branch, they consumed it immediately before a predator could steal it. Today, the modern capitalist world has weaponized this ancient survival instinct against us. We are constantly surrounded by brilliant digital mirages that are specifically designed to hijack our attention and drain our cognitive reserves. We scroll powerlessly through endless feeds of short videos, frantically chasing microscopic bursts of digital pleasure. We deeply crave the immediate high of seamless online shopping, the sudden thrill of a glowing notification, and the illusion of connection in a vast virtual void. This relentless addiction bleeds poisonously and inevitably into our crucial financial and career behaviors. When ordinary individuals attempt to build real wealth, they tragically carry their demand for instant feedback directly into the financial market. They skim a superficial tutorial and expect to become masterful investors within 3 days. They purchase a highly volatile asset and pray feverishly that it will double in value before tomorrow morning wakes them from their sleep. They accept a new job and demand an immediate promotion before ever truly proving their intrinsic worth to the organization. But what inevitably happens when cold, unforgiving reality denies them their expected instant reward? They become bitterly frustrated, deeply anxious, and profoundly depressed. They abandon their chosen strategy and immediately pivot to chase the very next shiny object that appears. They become perpetual beginners in every discipline, endlessly jumping from one financial illusion to another. They are not engaging in authentic investing. They are merely participating in desperate speculation. They are not patiently building a magnificent cathedral stone by stone. They are frantically erecting fragile sandcastles just moments before the violent and inevitable tide rolls in to erase them. Let us examine the deep contrast between emotion and rationality. The short-term mind is governed entirely by chaotic and unpredictable emotion. It reacts blindly and instinctively to the deafening noise of the ignorant crowd. When the market rises unnaturally, this mind swells with toxic arrogance and insatiable greed. When the market plunges, it collapses into hysterical and paralyzing fear. But generational wealth is never built upon a shaky foundation of emotional volatility. True financial freedom absolutely requires the cold, calculated, and unwavering silence of pure rationality. The truly wealthy do not react to the news. They anticipate the inevitable cycles. They do not chase fleeting trends. They quietly purchase undervalued assets when blood is flowing in the streets. The elite capitalists understand that real financial magic only happens in the quiet, undisturbed spaces that ordinary people find unbearably boring. Can you tolerate the deafening silence of waiting? Can you withstand the psychological agony of delayed gratification while everyone around you seems to be feasting lavishly on the dangerous illusion of temporary and debt-fueled prosperity? The modern obsession with utmost speed is the ultimate and most deadly enemy of sustainable, multi-generational success. When you arrogantly attempt to compress a 10-year journey of wisdom into a 3-month sprint of speculation, you inevitably sacrifice structural integrity. The faster you try to rise above your station, the more fragile your entire foundation becomes. You begin to take unnecessary and catastrophic risks. You borrow heavy sums of money that your future self cannot possibly repay. You betray your deepest moral values for a quick and dirty profit. And when the inevitable economic storm finally arrives, your hastily constructed financial empire shatters violently into 1,000 irreparable and worthless little pieces. The ancient philosophers knew that slow is smooth and smooth is eventually fast. True wealth accumulation is a deliberate process of slowly thickening your intellectual armor, not foolishly stripping it away for a temporary burst of unsustainable speed. Why do so many of us sprint willingly toward the overcrowded graveyard of ruined ambitions and shattered financial dreams? We must radically alter our fundamental perception of time. Time is not a cruel and indifferent master that slowly steals our fading youth. It is a powerful magnifying glass that ruthlessly amplifies our daily habits. If you spend your precious days consuming junk media and speculating on worthless assets, time will simply multiply your profound ignorance. But if you spend your quiet days refining your cognition, studying the underlying mechanisms of objective value, and cultivating emotional discipline, time will gradually become your most loyal and unstoppable servant. True long-termism is the beautiful process of aligning your daily actions with the indisputable and eternal laws of mathematics and human psychology. It is not merely about enduring pain or suffering silently through the years. It is about experiencing the quiet, sustained ecstasy of gradual and undeniable mastery. When you finally stop rushing toward an illusion, you begin the authentic journey toward freedom. You realize that the rat race was a labyrinth designed to harvest your energy for someone else's empire. The ultimate battle is never fought against the invisible hand of the market, nor is it waged against your competitors or the unfair economic system. The ultimate battle is fought entirely within the confines of your own mind. You must willingly choose the pain of discipline over the fleeting and poisonous comfort of instant gratification. You must recognize that every rushed decision is a tax levied upon your future potential. To break free from the illusion of busyness, you must first have the courage to stand completely still. You must stop moving just long enough to ask yourself where you are actually going. Are you chasing wealth, or are you just chasing the wind? Consider the tragedy of the diligent worker who saves every penny but never seeks to understand the fundamental nature of capital. They believe that their enduring frugality and their exhausting busyness will eventually protect them from hardship, but they remain tragically ignorant of the invisible forces like inflation and currency devaluation that silently erode their purchasing power every single night. Their definition of long-termism is simply enduring decades of labor while holding cash in a saving account that yields less than the cost of living increases. They are running an exhausting marathon on a treadmill that is slowly moving backward. This is the ultimate illusion of busyness. It is motion divorced from strategic and financial intelligence. True long-termism absolutely requires the relentless compounding of cognition, not just the compounding of stagnant capital. It demands that you wake up every single day seeking to become slightly less ignorant than you were the day before. It requires the humility to accept that your current worldview might be entirely flawed, and the courage to destroy your old beliefs. When you shift your focus from the frantic accumulation of currency to the deliberate expansion of your intellectual capacity, the illusion of busyness evaporates completely. You no longer feel the desperate urge to check the market prices every 5 minutes. You are no longer tormented by the jealousy you feel when you see a stranger experience rapid, unearned success. You find peace in the solid certainty of your own deepening knowledge. You understand that while the manic crowd is chasing fleeting shadows, you are patiently pouring the concrete for a fortress that will withstand the storms of a century. This is the profound difference between being merely busy and being truly, definitively productive in the game of life. Fuh, chapter Insight. True long-termism is not the passive endurance of wasted time, but the active and disciplined cultivation of cognitive compounding that transforms ordinary days into inevitable wealth. Chapter 2. Buffett's Way of Living. Let us shift our gaze away from the frantic crowds and direct our attention toward a quiet street in Omaha, Nebraska. Here resides a man who has mastered the profound art of wealth accumulation better than almost anyone else in modern human history. When ordinary people imagine the daily existence of a billionaire investor, they immediately picture a chaotic symphony of ringing telephones and shouting traders. They envision gleaming helicopters landing on private helipads and lavish dinners bathed in the golden glow of expensive champagne. But Warren Buffett utterly shatters this glittering illusion by choosing to live a life of absolute and uncompromising simplicity. His daily routine is not a desperate race against the clock. It is a methodical and deliberate masterclass in the philosophy of extreme restraint. Consider the physical space he inhabits. He continues to live in the exact same modest house that he purchased over 60 years ago. It is not a sprawling estate guarded by imposing iron gates, nor does it feature endless corridors of extravagant art. While his astonishing net worth has multiplied millions of times over, his domestic footprint has remained startlingly and intentionally small. Why does a man who could purchase any palace on earth choose to remain in such an unassuming dwelling? Ordinary individuals frequently beg him to upgrade his lifestyle, assuming that vast wealth demands proportional displays of grandeur. He simply smiles and gently declines, stating that he is perfectly comfortable exactly where he is. This is not the behavior of a miserly Scrooge hoarding pennies in the dark. It is the profound manifestation of a mind that has completely severed its dependence on external validation. Most people utilize material possessions as a desperate language to communicate their supposed value to complete strangers. They purchase luxury vehicles and oversized mansions to mask their deep internal insecurities. Buffett understands that when your internal stability is absolute, external status symbols become utterly irrelevant and meaningless. This deep philosophical stance extends naturally to his choice of transportation and daily consumption. He does not traverse the city in chauffeur-driven limousines or flashy Italian sports cars. He drives an ordinary, unremarkable vehicle that blends seamlessly into the mundane traffic of the American Midwest. His diet routinely consists of simple hamburgers and cold cola, completely rejecting the elaborate pageantry of fine dining. We must analyze the deep psychological freedom that accompanies this extreme lifestyle choice. When you are no longer trapped in the exhausting cycle of conspicuous consumption, a massive reservoir of mental energy is suddenly liberated. You are no longer tormented by the jealous need to outshine your neighbors. You are no longer a helpless slave to the relentless manipulations of modern advertising agencies. Restraint is not the punishing denial of joy. It is the active construction of an impenetrable fortress against worldly distractions. The average person spends a significant portion of their finite lifetime working merely to maintain possessions that they do not truly need. Buffett defeats this absurd paradigm by radically minimizing his desires, thereby maximizing his absolute freedom to pursue what truly matters. Let us examine how he chooses to spend the precious hours that his restraint has bought him. When he awakens, in the morning, his first action is not to frantically check global stock prices or scrutinize the dramatic headlines of financial news networks. He does not summon a dozen anxious executives into a high-stakes emergency meeting to micromanage their daily operations. Instead, he sits in complete silence and he simply reads. He dedicates 5 to 6 consecutive hours every single day to the deep and uninterrupted consumption of printed knowledge. He pores over dense annual reports, lengthy books, and analytical journals with the intense dedication of a scholarly monk. He vigorously refuses to let the urgent but unimportant noise of the day interfere with his cognitive nourishment. His office further reflects this monastic dedication to absolute focus. You will not find a glowing computer monitor illuminating his desk. There are no complex algorithms running endlessly on high-speed servers. There is only a traditional landline telephone, stacks of carefully curated reading material, and an abundance of quiet, undisturbed space. He deliberately architects an environment that fosters deep, penetrating thought. Why is this immense dedication to reading so crucial to his monumental success? Because he deeply understands that real wealth is not generated by frantic physical labor. It is generated by the relentless compounding of superior cognition. Every single page he analyzes is a tiny deposit into his intellectual bank account. Over the decades, these microscopic deposits evolve into an unstoppable avalanche of wisdom. Most ordinary individuals treat reading as a leisurely hobby or a boring chore to be avoided entirely. They demand information to be delivered in 15-second video clips because their attention spans have been tragically decimated by social media. They cannot tolerate the slow, difficult process of digesting complex and nuanced information. Thus, their cognition remains extremely shallow and easily manipulated by others. Buffett frequently points to the stacks of documents in his office and readily admits that he has built his entire fortune simply by reading and thinking. He operates in stark contrast to the hyperactive day trader who frenetically buys and sells thousands of shares within a single hour. The day trader relies on fleeting luck and chaotic market momentum. Buffett relies on ironclad logic and mathematical certainty. This brings us to one of his most powerful philosophical concepts, the circle of competence. The modern world constantly pressures us to have a strong opinion on every conceivable topic. We are encouraged to invest in the latest technological fad, even if we possess absolutely zero understanding of how it actually works. We succumb to the desperate fear of missing out on the next big boom. Buffett utterly rejects this dangerous psychological trap. He draws a very strict and unforgiving boundary around the specific industries and businesses that he thoroughly understands. If a company operates outside of this clearly defined circle, he will resolutely refuse to touch it, regardless of how spectacular the market hype might be. He will cheerfully watch others get temporarily rich without feeling the slightest pang of jealousy. He calmly acknowledges his own ignorance regarding complex sectors like emerging cryptocurrencies or highly speculative biotechnology startups. While arrogant investors plunge willingly into the dark unknown seeking rapid riches, Buffett safely remains within the illuminated confines of his own verified knowledge. He perfectly understands that in the game of investing, knowing exactly what you do not know is often more valuable than what you do know. This profound focus generates a massive strategic advantage over long periods of time. When you constantly scatter your finite attention across 100 different disciplines, you guarantee that you will never achieve true mastery in any single one of them. But when you ruthlessly channel all of your intellectual energy into a tiny handful of understandable metrics, you develop a terrifying level of analytical precision. His investment portfolio frequently contains only a very small number of carefully selected companies. He does not practice the widespread and cowardly strategy of extreme diversification used by those who lack deep conviction in their own research. Once he identifies an outstanding enterprise trading at a reasonable price, he purchases a massive stake and mentally prepares himself to hold that asset for many long decades. Critics have frequently mocked his incredibly conservative approach, especially during periods of extreme market euphoria. During the late 90s, many Wall Street analysts dismissed him as an outdated relic who had sadly failed to keep pace with the revolutionary internet boom. But he remained stoically unmoved by their disdainful laughter. He refused to abandon his proven principles just to please the manic and irrational crowd. When the massive technology bubble inevitably burst and erased trillions of dollars of imaginary wealth, Buffett emerged completely unscathed. His extraordinary patience had shielded him from the devastating madness that destroyed so many arrogant and impatient speculators. He emphatically proved that the stock market is not a casino for the lucky. It is a magnificent device for transferring wealth from the impatient to the patient. Why are we so terrified of simply doing nothing? Why does a portfolio left untouched for 10 years feel so psychologically uncomfortable to the average investor? Human nature deeply craves constant action and immediate tangible results. We feel secure when we are frantically pressing buttons, adjusting spreadsheets, and making bold declarations. We mistakenly equate restless activity with productive progress. Buffett teaches us that the most profitable investment decision is often the decision to sit quietly and do absolutely nothing at all. He allows the capable management teams of his chosen companies to perform the heavy lifting while he sleeps peacefully in Omaha. He surrenders the mechanics of growth to the unstoppable flow of time, understanding that a seed does not grow faster if you constantly dig it up to check its roots. His entire philosophy can be distilled down to the relentless application of a few exceedingly simple rules. Buy excellent companies led by honest managers at fair prices, and do not sell them unless the fundamental truth of the business permanently changes. Do not try to time the unpredictable swings of the macroeconomic pendulum. Do not let the terrified screams or the greedy cheers of the market dictate your emotional state. This level of simplicity requires an incomprehensible depth of discipline. It is extraordinarily difficult to remain sane when everyone around you is temporarily profiting from absolute insanity. But Buffett's life is a monumental testament to the fact that true grandeur resides in unwavering consistency. He does not seek to perform 1,000 brilliant miracles. He simply aims to avoid making crucial mistakes century after century. When we deeply analyze his existence, we must confront a harsh reality about our own chaotic lives. We frequently complain that we do not have enough time to read, yet we spend countless hours consuming poisonous digital entertainment. We claim that we want financial freedom, yet we willingly chain ourselves to massive debts by purchasing, depreciating assets that we cannot truly afford just to impress complete strangers. We blame unfair politicians, rigged financial systems, and bad luck for our lack of enduring wealth. But we rarely have the courage to examine our own desperate lack of focus and our tragic inability to delay gratification. We want the massive snowball of wealth without having to search patiently for the wet snow and the extremely long hill that are required to build it. Buffett does not dance to work every morning because he is obsessed with hoarding more green paper. He glides joyfully into his office because he is profoundly in love with the intellectual game itself. He has transformed the accumulation of capital into a beautiful and endless pursuit of objective truth. His wealth is not the primary goal. It is merely the inevitable mathematical byproduct of a life lived in absolute alignment with rational principles. If we truly desire to escape the suffocating gravity of poverty and mediocrity, we do not need to memorize complex financial formulas or predict the next technological revolution. We must simply adopt the monastic restraint and the laser-focused dedication of the Oracle of Omaha. We must learn to cultivate immense joy within the quiet, unseen moments of intellectual growth and reject the shallow applause of the frenzied world. Pull through chapter insight. Supreme wealth is rarely the result of frantic activity. It is the inevitable harvest of deliberate minimalist restraint, relentless intellectual focus, and the courage to stand still while the world rushes blindly toward destruction. Chapter 3. The Power of Compounding Mind. If Chapter 2 was a portrait of a man in absolute restraint, then Chapter 3 is an anatomy of the invisible engine that powers his immense success. We must now descend deep into the silent machinery of the human brain to understand the concept of cognitive compounding. Most people perceive investing as a series of rapid external actions, buying shares, selling assets, and scrolling through volatile charts. They view the stock market as a physical battlefield of capital. But for the true masters, investing is an internal game of intellectual growth. Wealth is not created in the market. It is forged in the quiet refineries of the thinking mind. We have established that reading is the primary raw material for this internal engine. But why does reading 500 pages every single day lead to incomprehensible wealth? It is because each new piece of information is not a simple addition to your knowledge, but a new connection in an ever-expanding web of understanding. When you read a book on history, you gain a perspective on human cycles. When you study a scientific breakthrough, you grasp the logic of innovation. When you analyze a corporate failure, you learn the warning signs of hubris. As these diverse threads of knowledge interweave, they form what Charlie Munger calls a lattice of mental models. You stop seeing the world as a series of disconnected events and begin perceiving the underlying mathematical and psychological patterns that govern everything. This is the birth of intellectual compounding. Like financial interest, knowledge does not grow linearly. 1 plus 1 does not equal 2 in the realm of cognition. 1 plus 1 eventually equals 11. Correct judgments are not guesses. They are the result of this massive hidden library of mental models processing new reality in real time. But why is this phenomenon so rare in our modern society? The answer lies in the harsh mathematics of the compounding curve. Imagine the famous riddle of the single penny doubling every single day for 30 days. If you offered this to a stranger on the street or even a diligent professional, their biological instincts would command them to reject it. They would prefer to take $1 million in cash today. They cannot visualize the extraordinary power hidden within that tiny, doubling copper coin. For the first 20 days, the person holding the doubling penny looks like an absolute fool to the outside world. While their peers are feasting on their immediate $1 million, the patient individual holds only about $5,000. They have invested 20 days of intense discipline and sacrifice, yet their reward is microscopic compared to the instant gratification of others. This is the agonizing valley of disappointment. This is the exact point where 99% of human beings abandon their long-term strategies. They suffer from intense self-doubt. They hear the mocking laughter of their neighbors who purchased flashy sports cars with their instant million. They feel the suffocating weight of boredom and the frustrating lack of visible progress. They conclude that the math must be flawed or that the game is rigged against them. They give up just as they approach the threshold of visibility. They fail to realize that, in the final 3 days of the month, that tiny penny will explode from 7 figures into over $5 million. All the real wealth is concentrated in the final moments of the curve. The thinking mind operates on this exact same mathematical logic. For the first decade of your intellectual journey, you may read thousands of books and analyze hundreds of financial statements without seeing any radical change in your circumstances. You are still living in an ordinary apartment. You are still working a standard job. You feel as though you are investing immense energy into a void. This is the great filter of humanity. Only those who possess an absolute, irrational faith in the power of compounding will survive this silent decade. Why can Buffett and Munger endure this monotony while others fail? Because they have transformed their relationship with boredom. They do not view reading as a chore necessary to reach a financial destination. They have cultivated a profound and authentic love for the act of learning itself. When you truly love the process, you are no longer dependent on the immediate feedback of the market. You are not waiting for the penny to double. You are enjoying the intricacies of the math. The average person is addicted to the toxic rush of newness. They crave the excitement of the latest cryptocurrency trend or the dramatic swings of day trading. They need their brains to be constantly bathed in the dopamine of novelty. But cognitive compounding is not new. It is the deepening of the old. It is the persistent refinement of fundamental truths. It is choosing to read a 500-year-old classic over a sensationalist morning tabloid. It is choosing the deep, resonant truth over the shallow, screaming lie. Consider the psychological distinction between a gambler and an investor. The gambler is searching for an event, a single moment of luck that will instantly rewrite their destiny. They want the jackpot. The investor is searching for a process, a reliable system that will slowly and inevitably accumulate wealth through the passage of time. The gambler lives in a state of constant stress and anxiety, forever chasing the wind. The investor lives in a state of profound inner peace, knowing that the laws of mathematics are working tirelessly in their favor while they sleep. We must ask ourselves, are we willing to be looked upon as fools for the first 20 days of our journey? Can we withstand the social pressure to conform to the frantic pace of our peers? Most people stay poor, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack the emotional fortitude to stay on the curve. They interrupt the compounding process because they cannot handle the silence of the early years. They dig up their seeds to see if they are growing, and in doing so, they ensure that nothing will ever truly bloom. Wealth is ultimately a reflection of your internal world. If your mind is a chaotic whirlpool of short-term desires and fleeting passions, your bank account will eventually reflect that chaos. But if your mind is a disciplined architecture of correct decisions built upon a foundation of deep knowledge, wealth will eventually flow toward you as naturally as water flows downhill. You do not find wealth in the world. You become a person who magnetically attracts wealth through the quality of your thoughts. The real game is not about predicting which way the market will swing tomorrow. That is a fool's errand. The real game is about ensuring that your understanding of reality is slightly more accurate today than it was yesterday. Every correct mental model you install in your mind decreases the probability of a catastrophic error. Over a lifetime, the avoidance of a few major blunders is more valuable than 1,000 minor victories. This is the wisdom of the compounding mind. We live in a world that is desperately rushing toward the next 30 seconds of gratification. We are surrounded by people who are sprinting toward poverty because they are too impatient to walk toward wealth. To break free, you must abandon the cult of speed. You must embrace the agony of the slow start. You must realize that the flat part of the curve is not wasted time. It is the essential foundation that supports the massive height of the peak. When you finally stop rushing, you start compounding. You stop chasing the $1 million today and start nurturing the penny. You begin to see that the real power in this world does not belong to those who move the fastest, but to those who can stay still the longest. The compounding mind is the only weapon capable of defeating the chaos of the modern world. It is the only path to a freedom that is absolute and unshakable. Full chapter insight: real wealth is the visible shadow of an invisible process. The relentless compounding of correct decisions within a mind that has mastered the art of enduring boredom. Chapter 4: Munger's mental operating system. To understand the true difference between the massive wealth of the elite and the perpetual struggle of the masses, we must look beyond the surface of bank statements and stock portfolios. We must examine the invisible architecture of the mind. Charlie Munger, who lived for nearly 100 years with perfect intellectual clarity, observed that most people spend their entire lives in a financial labyrinth, not because of external obstacles, but because of a flawed internal operating system. He believed that the conversations happening around the ordinary dinner table are often the primary source of a lifelong virus of poverty. Most parents unwittingly poison their children's future by teaching them to fear money, to resent the successful, and to seek only the illusory safety of a stable paycheck. They treat wealth as a forbidden fruit or a mathematical mystery that is beyond their reach. To rewrite this destructive script, we must install a new suite of mental rules. We must systematically replace biological instincts with rational principles. Let us deeply deconstruct the 10 fundamental laws of the Munger mental operating system, which are specifically designed to transform an ordinary human being into a masterful architect of value. Rule 1. Money is a tool, not a deity or a demon. In every typical neighborhood, you will find people who are psychologically paralyzed by their relationship with money. Some worship it with a desperate greed, sacrificing their health and relationships for a few more green paper slips. Others fear it, believing that discussing wealth is inherently shallow or even sinful. Both of these emotional extremes are catastrophic strategic errors. Munger taught his children to view money as coldly as a carpenter views a hammer or a wrench. If you use a hammer to build a magnificent cathedral, you are intelligent. If you use the same hammer to break your own thumb, you are foolish. But the hammer itself remains morally neutral. It is merely an instrument for moving resources across time and space. When you stop loving money and stop hating money, you finally acquire the ability to use money. You must strip away the superstitious narratives of your childhood and see currency for what it truly is, a mathematical measure of your ability to manipulate physical reality. Rule 2. Income is a product of solving problems, not a reward for selling time. This is the most dangerous trap in the modern educational system. From the age of 5, we are trained to follow a linear formula, achieve good grades, acquire a prestigious degree, and exchange 40 hours of our lives each week for a steady salary. But this formula contains a hidden death sentence for your wealth, because every human being is bound by the same 24 hours in a day. Selling time guarantees that your income has an absolute mathematical ceiling. True wealth is never calculated by the hour. It is calculated by the complexity of the problem you are capable of solving and the number of people you can serve. If you merely solve the simple problem of a dirty floor, your compensation will be minimal. But if you solve the massive problem of global logistical inefficiency or manage the lifelong savings of thousands of families, your rewards will be astronomical. You must stop asking how you can get a better job and start asking what massive troubles you can eliminate for the world. Wealth flows effortlessly toward those who position themselves as the ultimate solution to the greatest chaos. Rule 3. You must ruthlessly distinguish between assets and liabilities. This is the point where the middle class frequently commits financial suicide. In a standard accounting class, you are taught that your house and your car are part of your net worth. But in the Munger system, this is a deadly hallucination. We must use a far stricter definition. An asset is something that continuously deposits cash into your pocket, while a liability is something that continuously drains cash out of your pocket. Consider the large, luxurious house in the suburbs. Most families proudly view this as their greatest investment. But they must pay monthly mortgages, heavy property taxes, expensive insurance, and constant repair costs. Unless that house is generating rental income, it is a financial vampire sucking away your potential to build real capital. The poor accumulate expensive prisons made of brick and steel, while the rich buy ownership in productive businesses, bonds, and copyrights. To be truly wealthy, you must stop purchasing things that make you look rich and start purchasing things that actually make you rich. Rule 4. Master the biological agony of delayed gratification. We must confront the reality that human beings are hardwired to be poor. Our ancient brains demand the immediate consumption of every resource to ensure survival in a world of scarcity. Modern consumer culture exploits this weakness through credit card installments, one-click deliveries, and infinite digital entertainment. If you receive $1,000 and immediately purchase the latest smartphone, you have succumbed to your biological instincts. You have traded your future freedom for a temporary burst of dopamine. The rich mind understands that the real game is not about what you can buy today, but about what you can command tomorrow. Wealthy thinking requires you to endure the psychological pain of choosing the boring investment over the exciting purchase. You must learn to find deeper satisfaction in the growth of your capital than in the possession of new toys. Delaying gratification is like training a muscle. The more you deny your small desires today, the greater your ability to execute massive strategies tomorrow. True power is the ability to say no to the present, to say yes to the future. Rule 5. Cultivate an absolute and religious AW for compounding. We have discussed the penny that doubles every day, but we must understand why this is a spiritual principle rather than just a financial one. Compound interest is the rational reward for unwavering consistency. It requires you to accept a long period of apparent stagnation in exchange for an eventual explosion of results. Most people fail because they interrupt this process during the flat phase of the curve. They become bored, they become anxious, and they pull their capital out of the system just moments before the miracle begins. You must teach your mind to ignore the first 10 years of slow growth. You must become the person who can stand still while everyone else is running toward fleeting shortcuts. Compounding applies to your knowledge, your health, and your reputation just as much as your money. If you improve yourself by only 1% each day, you will not recognize yourself in 5 years. The secret to the world is not brilliance or luck. It is the ferocious refusal to stop the process of incremental improvement. Rule 6. Wealth is the byproduct of sincere value exchange, not predatory plunder. Many individuals remain poor because they harbor a subconscious belief that to be rich is to be evil. They believe that making money requires screwing over others. This victim mentality creates an internal resistance that prevents them from ever accumulating wealth. In a truly free market, you cannot force someone to give you their money. You must earn it by providing something they value more than their currency. If you view the market as a zero-sum battlefield, you will always be limited by your own paranoia. But if you view the market as a magnificent network of cooperation, you will find endless opportunities. The most successful businesses are those that create the most value for the most people. If you want to multiply your wealth, you must multiply the sincerity of your contribution. You must become the person who leaves every room better than you found it. When you obsess over the value you provide, the money becomes an inevitable and secondary shadow. Rule 7. Risk is not defined by volatility, but by your own ignorance. The general public is terrified of the stock market because they see it through the lens of a gambler. They see prices moving up and down and assume it is all driven by luck. But for the informed mind, risk is perfectly quantifiable. Risk is the gap between reality and your understanding of that reality. If you invest in a business you do not comprehend, you are not investing. You are gambling with your children's future. For a blind man, crossing a quiet street is a high-risk activity. For someone who can see the traffic lights, it is routine. You must draw a circle around your actual knowledge and vow to never step outside of it for any reason. It is far better to know everything about one tiny niche than to know a little bit about everything. The rich do not take big risks. They take big positions in situations where they have a massive mathematical and intellectual advantage. Safety is found in the depth of your research, not in the diversification of your ignorance. Rule 8. Your destiny is determined by the gravity of your social circle. This is an inflexible law of human sociology. You are the exact average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If you surround yourself with people who only talk about sports, celebrities, and their own victimhood, you will inevitably absorb their low standards. Stupidity and pessimism are highly contagious pathogens. They will slowly erode your ambition and your moral clarity until you become just as directionless as they are. You must perform a radical and brutal audit of your environment. You must seek out individuals who are more intelligent, more disciplined, and more morally robust than you are. You need a reference system that forces you to level up. Munger found this in Buffett, and together they formed a high-pressure chamber of intellectual growth. It is better to be alone than to be in bad company. If your friends are not pushing you to improve your mind and your capital, they are effectively killing your future. Protect your social environment as if your life depends on it, because it truly does. Rule 9. Take absolute responsibility for your own financial education. We must stop expecting the school system to teach us how to be free. Schools were created during the industrial age to produce obedient workers who would show up on time and follow orders without question. They will teach you how to solve for X in a calculus equation, but they will never teach you how to read a cash flow statement. They will never explain the difference between nominal value and real purchasing power. They want you to be a productive cog, not a sovereign individual. If you do not take ownership of your own financial literacy, you are voluntarily entering into a state of slavery. You must learn how to read contracts, how to evaluate risks, and how to spot a lie. You must become your own best advisor. In the information age, there is no excuse for ignorance. The tools of freedom are available to everyone with an internet connection, but most people choose to use those tools for distraction rather than education. If you are cheated by the system, it is because you remained willingly ignorant of how the system actually works. Rule 10. Wealth requires a feedback mechanism of generosity and purpose. The final law of the Munger operating system is perhaps the most counterintuitive. You must understand that money is like fertilizer. If you simply pile it up in a corner, it begins to rot and stink. But if you spread it across a productive field, it creates new life. If you accumulate wealth only to satisfy your own vanity, you will find that the more you have, the more anxious you become. You will become a slave to your own hoarding. True richness comes from the mindset of abundance, not scarcity. A mindset of scarcity lives in constant fear that someone else will take what is yours. A mindset of abundance knows that you have the intellectual capacity to generate unlimited value, and therefore you are not afraid to share. Giving back is not just a moral act. It is a psychological reset that prevents you from becoming obsessed with your own ego. When you view yourself as a steward of capital rather than a possessor of money, you acquire a level of peace that most billionaires will never know. Full chapter insight. Financial sovereignty is not achieved through luck, but through the systematic installation of a rational operating system that replaces biological weakness with mathematical discipline and moral responsibility. Chapter 5. Human Weakness and Behavioral Traps. Have you ever wondered why so many highly intelligent individuals completely destroy their own financial futures? We frequently blame the inscrutable fluctuations of the global stock market or the unfair policies of corrupt governments. But the absolute truth is far more devastating and profoundly intimate. The ultimate battlefield of wealth is not located on Wall Street. It is located entirely within the fragile, biological confines of your own human skull. Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett continuously remind us that the market is merely a neutral mechanism. It does not care about your desires, your fears, or your dreams. It simply reacts to the collective actions of millions of deeply flawed participants. Therefore, when you lose your precious capital, you are not truly defeated by the invisible hand of the economy. You are brutally defeated by the ancient, unresolved flaws within your own psychological architecture. To accumulate generational wealth, you must first become a master biologist of your own brain and understand its hidden chemical manipulations. Let us examine the most dangerous and seductive chemical saboteur known to humanity, dopamine. For hundreds of thousands of years, Our ancestors survived in a brutal world of extreme scarcity. Their brains were hardwired to seek immediate caloric rewards just to survive another harsh winter. If they found a sweet fruit, they devoured it instantly. They did not save the fruit for retirement. They consumed it because tomorrow was never guaranteed. This ancient survival mechanism kept our species alive in the hostile wilderness. However, in the abundant ecosystem of modern capitalism, this exact same biological programming becomes a fatal financial disease. We are no longer hunting for rare berries today. We are being ruthlessly hunted by multi-billion-dollar corporations that have weaponized our dopamine receptors against us. Consider the modern digital landscape that surrounds you every single second. Brilliant software engineers have designed social media applications, mobile games, and shopping platforms to inject microscopic doses of euphoria directly into your exhausted and fragile nervous system. Every time you swipe a brightly colored screen or click a glowing button, you receive a tiny, addictive hit of artificial pleasure. This insidious conditioning fundamentally destroys your capacity for sustained patience. You become desperately accustomed to receiving instant gratification for utterly meaningless actions. How can such a compromised mind possibly tolerate true long-term investing? When the addicted individual enters the financial market, they subconsciously demand the exact same instantaneous feedback. They purchase a highly speculative stock on a Tuesday and feel intense agony when they are not substantially wealthier by Thursday afternoon. They treat the sacred mechanism of compound interest as if it were a cheap, broken vending machine. They lack the emotional vocabulary to understand that real wealth is a slow-growing oak tree, not a weed that sprouts overnight. This desperate thirst for immediate results is the root cause of nearly every devastating financial blunder. It forces ordinary people to abandon meticulously crafted long-term strategies in favor of wild, destructive gambles. Let us reflect on the famous psychological experiment involving a child and a single marshmallow. The researcher offers the child one marshmallow immediately or two marshmallows if they can simply wait alone in a quiet room for 15 minutes. This agonizing choice perfectly mirrors the relentless financial dilemma that every adult faces every single day. The mind of poverty is entirely consumed by the seductive aroma of the first marshmallow. When an ordinary person receives a salary bonus of $1,000, their biological instincts immediately scream for rapid consumption. They feel an overwhelming urge to purchase an expensive dinner, a designer jacket, or the absolute latest electronic gadget available. This senseless consumption satisfies their primal craving for illusory status and immediate comfort. But in doing so, they have tragically traded their future freedom for a fleeting sensation that will evaporate before the end of the week. The mind of wealth operates in direct, conscious rebellion against this powerful and overwhelming biological mandate inherited from ancestors. The wealthy individual endures the quiet agony of refusal. They take that same $1,000 and silently deposit it into a boring, inaccessible index fund. They consciously choose to suffer the minor deprivation of today in order to purchase the absolute sovereignty of tomorrow. This act of delayed gratification is profoundly and beautifully unnatural. It requires you to override millions of years of evolutionary conditioning with pure, cold, and calculating rationality. Modern consumer culture is specifically designed to make this act of resistance feel socially awkward and personally depriving. Credit cards, frantic sales events, and targeted advertisements whisper to you constantly, urging you to surrender entirely to your base desires. They promise you that you deserve to experience lavish luxury right now, regardless of your actual net worth or your massive underlying debts. When you succumb to this seductive chorus, you voluntarily enslave yourself to the global banking system. You trade the precious hours of your finite human life to pay exorbitant, crippling interest rates. Beyond the personal addiction to immediate pleasure, we must confront a second, equally devastating psychological flaw: the herd mentality. As tribal creatures, human beings possess a deep, evolutionary need to conform to the behavior of the surrounding group. In ancient times, wandering away from the tribe was a guaranteed method of being devoured by vicious predators. Conformity was the ultimate shield against the terrors of the unknown wilderness. But in the complex architecture of modern financial markets, following the crowd is the absolute guarantee of total economic annihilation. True investing requires the profound courage to stand entirely alone when the rest of the world has gone completely and utterly mad around you. During a raging bull market, when asset prices soar to irrational heights, a contagious euphoria sweeps through the general population. Your neighbors, your coworkers, and even your family members will brag endlessly about their effortless profits. The intense psychological pain of missing out becomes utterly unbearable. The herd begins to stampede toward the great illusion of infinite wealth. Rational individuals find themselves doubting their own sanity. They abandon their carefully calculated valuation models because they cannot endure the social isolation of being left behind. They purchase vastly overpriced assets at the absolute peak of the market, driven entirely by the fear that everyone else is ascending to financial heaven without them participating. But the universe inevitably corrects these mass hallucinations with brutal efficiency. When the bubble bursts and the market plunges violently into the abyss, the herd mentality reverses its polarity instantly. The contagious euphoria immediately mutates into a paralyzing, collective terror. The very same people who mortgaged their homes to buy overvalued stocks now rush frantically to liquidate. They sell their potentially magnificent assets merely because the red numbers on their screens spark an ancestral panic within their brains. They do not sell because the fundamental business models have failed. They sell because the primal scream of the crowd commands them to flee. This is the supreme tragedy of the ordinary, uneducated retail investor. They buy high because greed instructs them to follow the upward momentum, and they sell low because fear demands that they escape the downward plunge. They are not navigating the market with a mathematical map and a logical compass. They are simply reacting to the shifting winds of public emotion like helpless leaves trapped in a hurricane. To achieve the phenomenal success of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, you must cultivate an extreme form of emotional stoicism. You must look at a crashing market not as a terrifying apocalypse, but as a magnificent clearance sale on the most valuable assets in the world. You must feel a cold, calculating joy when the ignorant crowd panics. When you see the masses throwing away their ownership in productive enterprises because they are terrified of temporary volatility, you must step forward with your accumulated cash and quietly purchase their discarded futures. This requires a level of psychological independence that borders on supreme arrogance. You must truly believe that your objective analysis is superior. How does one forge such an impenetrable mental shield against the storm? It begins by recognizing that you are your own worst enemy. You must treat your own emotional impulses with extreme suspicion. When you feel the frantic urge to take immediate financial action, because you just read a terrifying headline, you must force yourself to pause. You must institute a mandatory cooling-off period for every significant capital allocation decision. Write down the exact mathematical and logical reasons for your proposed action. If your justification contains emotional words like hope, fear, or panic, you are not investing. You are simply surrendering to your biological flaws. You are letting the monkey brain drive. The journey to generational wealth is not a triumphant march across a bright and sunny field. It is a brutal, decades-long siege waged against the darkest and weakest corners of your own soul. You must continuously slay the dragons of envy when you see foolish people getting temporarily rich through reckless and unsustainable speculation. You must conquer the demons of despair when your perfectly logical strategy underperforms the manic market for 3 consecutive years. The world will constantly test your resolve with brilliant deceptions and terrifying illusions. It will try to break your iron discipline with the poisonous promise of easy money and the exaggerated threat of complete financial ruin. But if you can anchor your mind to the bedrock principles of objective value and unstoppable time, the deafening noise of the crowd will eventually fade into a meaningless whisper. You will realize that the stock market is simply a giant mirror reflecting the psychological stability of its participants. It ruthlessly punishes the impatient and generously rewards the stoic. The ultimate philosophical revelation is that you cannot master capital until you have first mastered yourself. Wealth is the final outward manifestation of intense internal order. When you finally stop reacting like a terrified animal and start calculating like a sovereign architect, the invisible financial chains that bind you will rust and fall away forever. Fu. Chapter. Insight. Human beings never truly lose their wealth to the fluctuations of the market. They surrender their fortunes voluntarily to the biological tyranny of dopamine, panic, and the contagious madness of the herd. Chapter 6. Where wealth truly comes from. We have explored the psychological traps that keep the masses shackled to poverty. Now we must confront the absolute core of the economic machine. We must ask ourselves a very direct and uncomfortable question. Where does true wealth actually come from? Why does the diligent factory worker remain poor, while the silent investor accumulates vast fortunes while sleeping? The answer lies in a fundamental misunderstanding of what money actually represents. From the very first day of our formal education, we are taught a disastrous equation. We are instructed that hard work multiplied by time equals financial success. We are conditioned to believe that if we simply study harder and work longer, the universe will automatically reward us with abundance. This equation is a carefully constructed illusion designed to manufacture obedient employees. It teaches us to exchange our most precious and irreplaceable resource for currency. When you accept a salary, you are essentially selling fractions of your mortal existence to an employer. You are trading the finite beating of your heart for small stacks of devaluing green paper. Why is selling your time a guaranteed mathematical sentence to lifelong financial struggle? Because every single human being on Earth is strictly bound by the same inflexible laws of physics. You only possess 24 hours in a single day. You must sleep, you must eat, and you must rest. Your capacity for physical and mental labor has an absolute and unbreakable ceiling. If your income is directly tied to the hours you physically work, your wealth cannot possibly scale. Even if you earn $1,000 every single hour, you are still trapped inside the biological prison of your own endurance. When you stop working due to illness or exhaustion, your income ceases instantly. You are a highly paid slave, but you are still a slave. True capitalists understand that genuine wealth is never generated by selling time. Genuine wealth is generated by a completely different formula. Wealth is the mathematical product of the value you create multiplied by the scale at which you deliver that value. It is the decoupling of your financial destiny from the biological limitations of your physical body. Money is merely a neutral certificate of value created for others. It is the world's way of saying thank you for solving a problem. If you only solve very small common problems, you will only receive small common rewards. If you sweep a floor, you have solved a minor inconvenience for a few people, and the market compensates you with minimum wage. But what happens when you shift your focus from selling your labor to solving massive and complex puzzles. Consider the brilliant architect who designs a software system that eliminates logistical inefficiencies for millions of businesses globally. That single piece of code solves a monumental problem at a terrifying scale. The architect writes the code once, but it works tirelessly forever. This is the magic of scalability. The architect is no longer trading hours for dollars. They have built an invisible machine that generates value while they sleep, while they travel, and while they spend time with their children. Their wealth explodes not because they worked harder than the janitor, but because their solution touched millions of lives simultaneously. We must deeply analyze the psychological resistance to this concept. The middle-class mind is terrified of venturing away from the comforting predictability of the hourly wage. A salary provides the illusion of safety in a highly chaotic world. It tells you exactly what you are worth every 2 weeks, eliminating the dreadful anxiety of the unknown. But this so-called safety is the most expensive luxury you will ever purchase. You pay for this safety by surrendering your absolute potential. The entrepreneur and the investor willingly step into the terrifying abyss of uncertainty. They accept that they might work for 5 years without earning a single penny, because they are not seeking a wage. They are building an asset. What exactly is an asset in its purest philosophical form? An asset is a piece of the world that belongs entirely to you and operates independently of your immediate effort. It is a business system, a piece of intellectual property, a real estate portfolio, or a collection of dividend-yielding stocks. An asset is a silent, uncomplaining employee that works 24 hours a day. Wages merely allow you to survive the present week. They pay the landlord, they purchase the groceries, and they settle the utility bills. But assets do something far more profound and magical. Assets buy back your stolen time. Every dollar generated by your investments is a fraction of your future that you have successfully liberated from the chains of obligation. Consider the tragic psychology of the high-earning professional. The successful surgeon or the corporate lawyer makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. They feel immensely wealthy as they drive their luxury vehicles and sleep in their sprawling mansions. But if they suffer a nervous breakdown or lose their physical dexterity, their empire collapses immediately. Their wealth is extremely fragile. They have confused high income with true wealth. High income simply means you turn the hamster wheel faster than everyone else. True wealth means you own the entire wheel and can step off whenever you desire without suffering any financial consequences. Wealth is not measured by the size of your bank account. It is measured by the amount of unstructured time you completely control. To cross the chasm from the working class to the capitalist class, you must radically transform your dinner table conversations. You must stop complaining about unfair bosses and stagnant wages. Instead, you must start asking deep, penetrating questions about the world. What frustrates people? Where is the inefficiency? What systems are broken and begging to be repaired by someone with courage? The mindset of poverty is fundamentally obsessed with consumption and extraction. It constantly asks, what can the world give to me today? The mindset of wealth is radically generous and obsessed with production. It constantly asks, what massive value can I inject into the world tomorrow? When you obsess over helping others, the universe unfailingly opens its vaults to you. We must also examine the concept of leverage, which is the ultimate multiplier of value. Ordinary people only use their own 2 hands and their own single brain. They suffer from the delusion that if they want something done correctly, they must do it themselves. This stifling perfectionism guarantees that they will remain small and insignificant forever. True masters of wealth employ extensive leverage. They use the capital of others, the specialized labor of others, and the brilliant technology built by others to multiply their own intentions. They become conductors of a massive symphony rather than exhausted soloists trying to play every single instrument simultaneously. Leverage is the magic mechanism that bends time and space to your will. But leverage also requires a supreme level of emotional maturity. When you use borrowed capital or manage large teams, the consequences of your decisions are amplified tremendously. A single cognitive error can erase decades of progress. Therefore, you can only apply massive leverage when you have thoroughly cleansed your mind of arrogance, impatience, and the desire for immediate ego gratification. It is crucial to understand that the capitalist system never unfairly discriminates against anyone based on their background. The market does not care about your biological attributes or your tragic childhood story. The market is a cold, calculating, and unemotional judge that only weighs one specific metric. It only weighs the objective utility and scarcity of the value you provide. If you are currently struggling in a state of perpetual poverty, you must confront a very harsh and unforgiving truth. The market has objectively determined that the value you are currently providing is easily replaceable. This is not a moral judgment against your character as a human being. It is merely a mathematical signal demanding that you radically upgrade your skills. Many individuals deeply resent this cold reality. They protest the injustice of wealth, disparity, and demand that external authorities forcibly redistribute the assets of the successful. But confiscating wealth does not create value. It merely destroys the incentive to produce. True financial sovereignty can never be given to you by anyone. It must be earned through your own relentless evolution. You must consciously choose to stop being a passive consumer of the world's resources and become an active creator of solutions. You must endure the agonizing process of learning complex subjects that scrape against your intellectual comfort zone. You must willingly subject yourself to the risk of humiliating public failure while attempting to build systems of scale. When you finally understand that your wages have a permanent biological ceiling while your assets possess an infinite mathematical horizon, everything changes. You stop working for money and you force money to work unceasingly for you. You stop viewing the rich with bitter jealousy and start analyzing them as fascinating blueprints for your own eventual and inevitable ascent. We now stand at a profound philosophical crossroads. Will you continue to sell your sacred, irreplaceable time for a measly fraction of its true worth? Will you spend another decade turning the wheel for a master who will readily replace you the moment you falter? Or will you seize the terrifying responsibility of building your own sovereign architecture? The creation of wealth is not a dark art reserved for a privileged few. It is an open-source formula available to anyone with the courage to reprogram their own mind. It requires you to banish the desperate need for safety and embrace the magnificent chaos of providing value. It is the ultimate expression of human agency and creative willpower. You must dedicate every remaining breath to the construction of enduring assets. You must view every financial decision through the lens of leverage and scale. You must relentlessly seek out friction in the world and smooth it over with your unique ingenuity. When you align your daily actions with these eternal truths, wealth becomes an absolute and inescapable certainty. Chapter Insight. True wealth is never accumulated by selling the finite fractions of your mortal existence. It is forged by providing massive value at scale through uncomplaining assets that buy back your freedom. Chapter 7. The nature of investing. We have now established that true wealth is generated through the creation of scalable value and the accumulation of productive assets. But how does one actually navigate the treacherous ocean of the financial markets to acquire these assets? When we utter the word investing, what exactly do we mean? For the vast majority of the global population, the concept of investing is hopelessly entangled with the concept of mystical fortune-telling. The ordinary individual approaches the stock market with the exact same psychological posture as a desperate peasant approaching a crystal ball. They obsessively consume financial news, hoping to discover a secret prophecy about what the economy will do tomorrow morning. They desperately want to know if interest rates will rise next month, or if a specific currency will collapse by the end of the year. This frantic desire to predict the future stems from a deep biological terror of uncertainty. The human brain despises chaos and will readily pay handsome fees to any charismatic expert who will confidently lie to them about what happens next. But we must embrace a cold and sobering philosophical truth. The future is fundamentally unknowable. It is a chaotic symphony of infinite variables that no human mind can accurately compute. The ultimate masters of capital, such as Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, never waste a single ounce of cognitive energy attempting to predict macroeconomic weather. They understand that true investing is never about predicting the unpredictable. It is entirely about making highly rational choices in the present moment. You cannot predict when the next massive financial hurricane will strike the coastline, but you can absolutely choose to construct your financial fortress using solid concrete rather than fragile straw. Investing is the deliberate selection of exceptional businesses possessing enduring competitive advantages, regardless of whether the sky is currently sunny or filled with dark, gathering clouds. When you shift your paradigm from frantic prediction to patient selection, the endless noise of the market suddenly becomes entirely irrelevant. We must now deconstruct the most widely misunderstood concept in the entire financial world, the concept of risk. If you enter any traditional academic finance classroom, the professor will display complex mathematical formulas and declare that risk is defined by volatility. They will tell you that if a stock price bounces wildly up and down, it is highly risky, and if it barely moves, it is safe. This academic definition is a dangerous and tragic illusion that has destroyed millions of portfolios. Volatility is merely the rhythmic breathing of a free and open market. The price of an asset will naturally fluctuate based on the manic-depressive mood swings of the ignorant crowd. But a temporary drop in quoted price does not mean the underlying enterprise has become fundamentally riskier. Charlie Munger offers a far more profound and philosophically accurate definition. He states that risk does not come from the mathematical volatility of the market. Risk comes entirely from your own personal ignorance. Let us employ a simple metaphor to illuminate this absolute truth. Is crossing a busy metropolitan intersection a high-risk activity? If you are completely blind and stripped of your hearing, stepping into that intersection is an act of suicidal gambling. But if you possess perfect vision, understand the rules of traffic, and wait patiently for the illuminated green signal, crossing the exact same intersection is an extremely low-risk routine. The objective danger of the road has not changed at all. The only variable that changed was the depth of your own awareness. When the ordinary retail investor purchases shares in a complex biotechnology firm without understanding a single syllable of their medical research, they are walking blindly into highway traffic. They are not investing, they are praying. Because they are wholly ignorant of the underlying mechanics of the business, their risk is astronomically high. Conversely, when a seasoned master purchases a railroad company after spending 10 years studying freight volumes, operating margins, and regulatory moats, their risk is shockingly low. Even if the stock price plunges 30%, the very next day, due to irrational macroeconomic panic, the master does not feel the slightest tremor of fear. They know exactly what they own. This brings us to the most crucial defensive weapon in the entire arsenal of capitalism, the circle of competence. Imagine drawing a chalk circle on the ground. Inside this circle are the few specific industries, business models, and economic mechanisms that you truly, deeply comprehend. Outside this circle lies the vast, infinite universe of things you do not understand. The supreme rule of enduring wealth is so simple that it baffles the arrogant mind. You must never, under any circumstances, step outside of your circle of competence. It absolutely does not matter how microscopic your circle might be. You could only understand the economics of local car washes or regional bakeries. The size of your intellect is not the deciding factor. The only metric that dictates your financial survival is your ability to know exactly where the boundary of your circle lies and your iron discipline to stay safely inside it. The ultimate tragedy occurs when arrogance convinces an individual that their circle is larger than it actually is. A brilliant heart surgeon might possess a massive circle of competence in medicine, but because he is highly respected in the operating room, he hubristically assumes he also understands the intricate economics of overseas real estate development. He steps outside his sacred boundary, abandons his advantage, and promptly loses his entire fortune to savvy operators who actually live within that specific circle. Intelligence cannot save you when you voluntarily wade into the deep waters of your own ignorance. We must continuously contrast the elegant discipline of true investing with the frenzied chaos of gambling. The modern financial infrastructure has been deliberately gamified to resemble a Las Vegas casino. Glowing charts, flashing red and green numbers, and instant trading applications are all designed to exploit our neurological vulnerabilities. They whisper the seductive lie that action equals progress. The gambler is psychologically addicted to the thrill of the unknown event. They approach the market seeking an adrenaline rush, hoping that a lucky bet will instantly transform their dreary reality. The gambler relies on a phenomenon over which they have absolutely zero control. Over a long enough timeline, the relentless mathematics of the casino will mathematically guarantee their ultimate ruin. True investing is the exact philosophical opposite of gambling. If you are experiencing heart-pounding excitement while managing your capital, you are doing it completely wrong. Genuine investing should be as exhilarating as watching thick paint dry on a blank wall or observing a small patch of grass grow centimeter by centimeter. It is an inherently boring, methodical, and silent process. The investor does not rely on blind luck or the generosity of fate. The investor relies on unshakable mathematical logic and the inevitable production of real economic value. They are not placing bets on whether a number will be red or black. They are purchasing a fractional ownership stake in a cash-generating engine. They become quiet partners in the relentless progress of human industry. Why is it so extraordinarily difficult for the average person to tell the difference between the two? Because during periods of intense market euphoria, the gamblers always appear to be winning. When a massive speculative bubble inflates, fools and amateurs become fabulously wealthy overnight simply by throwing darts at a list of trendy technology stocks or obscure cryptocurrencies. The disciplined investor is forced to stand on the sidelines, watching their ignorant neighbors purchase luxury yachts with unearned riches. This is the ultimate agony of the capitalist journey. The primal brain screams at you to abandon your boring principles, to step outside your circle of competence, and to join the manic carnival of easy money before it is too late. But the true philosopher of wealth knows that every bubble must eventually face the gravity of objective value. When the euphoria exhausts itself and the illusory money evaporates into thin air, the gamblers are left holding worthless ashes. They are swept away by the brutal tide of reality. Meanwhile, the disciplined investor emerges completely unscathed, clutching their solid, undervalued assets. Investing is ultimately an exercise in profound epistemological humility. It requires you to look in the mirror and honestly admit the vast depths of your own stupidity. You must be willing to say the words "I do not know" 1,000 times a week. You must let 1,000 brilliant opportunities pass you by simply because they do not meet your strict criteria for absolute comprehension. This humility is the heavy armor that deflects the arrows of financial ruin. When you finally accept that you cannot predict the future actions of the Federal Reserve, the outcome of geopolitical conflicts, or the sudden swings of market sentiment, you are liberated. You stop wasting your precious energy on useless fortune-telling and focus entirely on valuing what already exists. You become a sniper waiting patiently in the silent woods. You do not fire your weapon randomly into the bushes. Every time you hear a rustling leaf, you wait for days, weeks, or even years until the perfect, unmistakable target steps directly into your crosshairs. And when you finally pull the trigger, you do so with absolute, unwavering mathematical conviction. This is the deepest secret of the wealthy elite. They do not possess a magical crystal ball. They merely possess a superior emotional operating system that prevents them from conflating action with progress. They have learned to find immense psychological comfort in the cold, unfeeling embrace of objective reality, refusing to be swayed by the sirens of unearned speculation. Through Chapter Insight. True investing is never the arrogant attempt to predict the unknowable future. It is the humble, patient, and utterly boring selection of undeniable value within the strict boundaries of your own proven competence. Chapter 8. Philosophical Reflection on Wealth and Time. We have reached the final summit of our intellectual journey together. We must now ascend beyond the cold mechanics of capital and enter the rarefied air of pure philosophy. We must confront the ultimate and most uncomfortable questions regarding human existence. Is the massive distribution of global wealth fundamentally fair? Or is it merely a cruel and arbitrary lottery of birth and circumstance? Millions of individuals bitterly believe that financial success is entirely dictated by pure blind luck. They argue that those who accumulate generational fortunes are simply the fortunate survivors of a chaotic and unpredictable statistical game. They insist that because the starting line is deeply unequal, the entire race must be inherently rigged against the ordinary and hardworking person. This victim mentality is the ultimate and most devastating psychological prison ever designed. It completely absolves the individual of any personal responsibility for their own fate. If the game is truly rigged, then there is absolutely no reason to endure the agony of delayed gratification or the grueling effort of cognitive compounding. Surrender becomes the most logical and comforting choice. It is absolutely undeniable that we do not choose the specific circumstances of our birth. We do not select our parents, our initial socioeconomic status, or the specific century in which we are born. However, while the starting line is brutally unequal, there is one supreme variable that remains utterly egalitarian across the entire human species. That universal variable is time. The most powerful emperor and the most impoverished peasant both receive the exact same 24 hours every single day. Time is the only truly objective and incorruptible currency in the entire universe. The profound philosophical difference between the wealthy and the poor is found entirely in how they choose to allocate this finite and rapidly evaporating resource. The impoverished mind views time as a heavy burden that must be endured or mindlessly killed through frivolous entertainment. They sell their precious hours to the highest bidder merely to survive the current week. The wealthy mind views time as the ultimate soil in which the seeds of compounding value must be planted. They do not kill time, they masterfully architect it. Can the magnificent success of a billionaire truly be replicated by an ordinary person? The answer is a paradox of yes and no. You cannot possibly replicate the exact historical timeline or the specific economic opportunities that existed 50 years ago. You cannot travel back to the 20th century to purchase undervalued railroads or forgotten textile mills. However, you can absolutely replicate the invisible operating system that made their success inevitable. The timeless principles of utmost restraint, continuous learning, and emotional stoicism are not bound by any specific era. These universal laws function just as flawlessly in the modern digital economy as they did during the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. The rules remain unchanged forever. We must ask ourselves if a human being can truly design their own unique trajectory through life. Are we helpless leaves blown about by the random winds of macroeconomic fate, or are we sovereign captains capable of steering our own vessels through the storm? The philosophy of true wealth dictates that you are the absolute author of your own destiny. Society will endlessly attempt to write a default script for your existence. It will demand that you consume blindly, borrow recklessly, and conform silently to the exhausting rhythm of the industrial machine. Breaking free from this predetermined script requires a monumental act of rebellion. You must consciously reject the comforting illusions that keep the general population docile and compliant. Consider the psychological agony of the awakening process. When you first realize that your entire financial education was a carefully constructed lie, you will experience intense anger and profound regret. You will mourn the years you wasted chasing the shallow applause of the crowd. But this pain is the essential catalyst for your ultimate intellectual and financial liberation. You must shift your internal paradigm from passive consumption to active creation. You must stop asking the world to provide for your needs and start demanding excellence from your own mind. When you realize that every frustrating problem in society is actually a brilliant opportunity disguised as hard work, your entire view of reality will fundamentally shift. The true essence of long-termism is not simply the accumulation of green paper inside a bank vault. It is the deliberate and painstaking cultivation of your own immortal character. Money is merely the objective scoreboard that revalidates the superiority of your decision-making process. The real prize is the person you must become in order to accumulate that wealth. You must become an individual who possesses terrifying discipline, incomprehensible patience, and an unshakable moral compass. You must become impervious to the seductive whispers of greed and the paralyzing screams of panic. This level of personal evolution is worth infinitely more than any financial dividend. It grants you an inner peace that no market crash can ever destroy. Let us reflect on the tragic illusion of the typical middle-class retirement. Millions of people willingly subjugate themselves to careers they despise for 4 decades, holding on to the flimsy promise that they will eventually be permitted to relax in their final years. They trade the absolute best years of their vibrant youth for a severely diminished and exhausted old age. They forget that time does not flow backward. You cannot purchase the boundless energy of your 20s when you are finally rich in your 70s. The masterful capitalist does not wait 40 years to live. They design a system that liberates their time immediately. They build enduring assets so that every single day belongs entirely and exclusively to them. This is the supreme philosophical distinction between being merely rich and being truly wealthy. The rich person owns a massive collection of expensive objects that constantly demand maintenance and anxiety. The wealthy person owns their own schedule completely. They possess the ultimate luxury of choosing exactly how, where, and with whom they will spend their irreplaceable remaining heartbeats. We must also confront the deeply interconnected nature of true value. The greatest investors are never solitary predators hunting in the dark. They are brilliant capital allocators who direct resources toward human flourishing. When you invest wisely, you are funding the innovations, the infrastructure, and the cures that push human civilization forward. Your private wealth becomes a public utility. This is why Charlie Munger heavily emphasized the moral imperative of generosity and education. If your only goal is to die with the largest possible bank account, you have failed the ultimate test of humanity. True philosophical wealth demands that you become a generous teacher and a benefactor. You must plant giant oak trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. As we map these grand concepts onto our current reality, we see a world that is fracturing under the weight of infinite distraction and unsustainable debt. The chasm between the cognitively disciplined and the emotionally impulsive is widening into an unbridgeable canyon. The modern economy is a ruthless filtering mechanism that punishes ignorance with unprecedented severity and speed. You must understand that no government policy, no political revolution, and no sudden stroke of luck will ever rescue you from your own bad decisions. The system will inevitably harvest the wealth of the impatient and transfer it silently into the vaults of the prepared. You must willingly choose which side of that brutal mathematical transfer you want to be on. The universe does not owe you prosperity. The market does not care about your sacrifices or your tears. It only responds to the cold, objective application of truth and time. You must eradicate every trace of entitlement from your soul. You must accept complete and utter responsibility for every single financial outcome in your entire life, both good and bad. When you finally embrace this heavy but magnificent burden, you will experience a surge of unstoppable power. You will no longer fear the unknown future because you will know that your mind is capable of deciphering any puzzle. You will stop seeking useless shortcuts and start walking the long, beautiful path of relentless intellectual and financial compounding. Let us conclude this deep journey by reminding ourselves that the true measure of a life is not found in a spreadsheet. Wealth is merely the foundational tool that removes the scarcity and panic from daily survival. It is the sturdy stage upon which you must then perform the genuine purpose of your existence. Do not let the pursuit of the tool become the meaning of the life. If this deconstruction of human psychology, value creation, and the flow of time has resonated with your intellectual spirit, please subscribe to my channel and join our quiet community of deep thinkers. We are a rare tribe in a world consumed by superficial noise. We must continue to evolve our minds and protect our sacred time together. As you leave this video and return to the chaotic rhythm of your daily existence, I want to leave you with one final, piercing question to disturb your complacency. Ponder this deeply before you sleep tonight. If everything you currently believe about money was installed by a system deliberately designed to keep you poor, what specific conversation will you change at your dinner table tomorrow? True financial sovereignty is the ultimate philosophical victory over determinism, proving that while we do not choose our starting circumstances, we can absolutely architect our destiny through the relentless and rational application of time.